Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Download with Joe. I'm your co-host, Lewis Martin, founder of LMC, which is a talent solutions business dedicated to supporting companies in the smart building space. As always, I'm joined by Joe, who's just come back from some travel at Blueprint. How you doing, Joe?
I'm good, Lewis. Thanks. Good morning. Yeah, Blueprint was pretty well done, all in all. I think a lot of good meetings, a lot of good activity. What we expect. The group that puts it on is, I would say, one of the consistent pieces of feedback was always very well run, very well organized. There's a lot more to like, but it was a good time for a couple days.
Nice. And we've got a special guest. Rick LeBlanc joins us, which I'm very excited about, and so is Joe. And spent the last couple of weeks just fine-tuning what we're going to speak about today. Before Rick introduces himself, anyone that's listened to this, whether it's been live or back, once you've had time, we like to keep structure in terms of having key themes, as well as also now starting to introduce different guests with different backgrounds. We've had a couple of guests on the ESG or sustainability sides, and now we really want to hone in on building automation, because ultimately that is one of the core elements of quote unquote the smart building space, and there isn't many better people to have given his experience than Rick. So Rick, welcome to the show.
Glad to be here. Wonderful. I like what you guys are doing with this event.
Appreciate it. On the off chance, Rick, that no one is aware of your backgrounds, what you've done, and what you're currently doing, how would you sum that up in an elevator pitch?
Well, I'm a building automation gym rat. So I've been in the industry for a long, long time, over 45 years, and mostly with Siemens and the predecessor companies of Siemens Building Technologies. And then in the last few years, I've been with a private equity firm investing in consolidation of system integrators. And so a background of both factory R&D engineering and manufacturing, as well as installation and service companies. And over that time, I've probably seen inside 200 system integrators. Seen the good, the bad, the not so good. So some experience, yes.
Yeah, and Rick, we talk about this a little bit. I certainly talk about it in my newsletter, but most people watching this, I think, know what a systems integrator does and is. Some may not, but I think what's interesting is that you've seen, I don't know that I would say both ends of our industry, but you've certainly seen kind of the continuum or the value chain of our industry, from Siemens being an OEM that has a lot of direct service, independent systems integrators that might install Siemens products or other products. Maybe a place to start is just, how do you, for somebody who's maybe not as well acquainted to the industry as you are, or even Lewis and I, just that value chain, like how do you kind of see it all fitting together?
Yeah, I think it's pretty straightforward. It's like a lot of other industries, whether it be fire alarm or elevators. On the one hand, you have manufacturers who make building automation system controllers, software, and some also make all of the field devices, valves, actuators, sensors. And at the other end of the value chain, you have the end user, and there's a challenge to get the product from the manufacturer to the end user. So you have in the middle, you have an installation and service need, and that's filled either by company-owned branches for certain manufacturers or independent system integrators. Some manufacturers have both. And the independent system integrator is the largest channel these days. There's only a few manufacturers that have a big branch organization, but virtually every manufacturer goes through an independent system integrator channel. And the independent system integrator, as you know, has a unique characteristic in that, unlike a company-owned branch, an independent system integrator can put anything in the building. They can get any
Right.
product. And what some of them like to advertise is, we are best of breed people. We get the best whatever we need for an application, whereas
Yeah.
the other company-owned branches only get what the factory provides. And I think that's a little simplistic, but it's close.
Yeah. And so some OEMs have very strong channels or network owned networks in the States. Some of them have go through primarily through independents, and then there's some that are there's hybrids, right, where there's franchises, or there are franchises that are over time get bought back. So it's and then so that was one kind of quick follow question, but I've also seen some data from the Department of Energy that has cited, tens of thousands of independent systems integrators. I think those numbers include residential, and you could argue when you call an HVAC company to come work on your HVAC system, you're not calling one of the big OEMs. You're calling somebody who is independent that represents them and sells their products. So the tens of thousands, I think, includes residential and commercial, and I would assume the residential is a bigger share. But average, I've seen numbers, average number of employees could be 10, 15 employees. Revenue obviously is pretty low, single digit millions. There's obviously some that are bigger, but I mean, that's just kind of digging in a little bit more to the dynamics of this space. Does that kind of jive with or map with what your sense is as well?
Yes, my background is commercial, institutional
Yeah.
controls, and I would say this, that over time, the OEMs, the equipment manufacturers, building controls equipment
Right.
manufacturers, there's 20 or 30 of them, and there's another 50 of them that make various field devices. But
Yep.
each OEM decides how to go to market. They either decide they're going to build their own distribution channel,
Mm-hmm.
company-owned branches,
Yeah.
hire the people, sales, installation, and service, or they go through an independent system integrator. And that choice is based on the perceived risk. So some
Yeah.
manufacturers just like to focus on the engineering and the manufacturing of equipment, and to
Yeah.
them that's sufficient. Other manufacturers want the additional revenue that comes from installation and service, and they're willing to invest in the field organization to do that. Now,
Yeah.
system integrators as a group they're often people that used to work at one of the big
Right.
OEMs. So they left one of the major manufacturers, they learned the trade, they learned the business, then they went on their own and they started to represent various manufacturers. But a system integrator has to have relationships with a building automation provider, a valve and
Right.
actuator provider. They have to be able to buy sensors, electrical devices, and they can piece it together. They can integrate the system by doing that.
Yeah.
And there's lots of them. There's hundreds of them. And
Yeah.
a lot of them are people that started 20, 30 years ago. Some are more
Yeah.
recent. Harder to go into a major urban market and start a system integrator business
Yeah.
because there's so many of them. And,
Mm.
Yeah.
lots of good ones.
Yeah.
How
And go ahead, Lewis. Yeah. Sorry.
how do you start that relationship? Is it mutual, as in, for example, the system integrators just started up their business? Do they think, right, I'm going to rep Siemens or I'm going to rep Schneider? Or is it those large OEMs or equipment providers that are looking to then approach these system integrators?
Yeah, I think it's a two-way effort. Newer OEMs that are relatively new to the market, compared to the big four. The big four have been around for 50 years,
Mm-hmm.
With their various acquisitions along the way. They've been around for a long time. The newer entrants in the last 10 years, their challenge is how do we get distribution? So
Yeah.
what they do is they reach out to different people and try to convince them to use their line. Uh, an independent system integrator can approach a manufacturer and say, hey, we've got a business in whatever city. We'd like to represent your product. And then the dialogue is, does the manufacturer need representation there? Do they want to improve representation there,
Right.
increase sales, or are they full up? And some
Yeah.
of them are full up because some manufacturers think, okay, we've assigned the territory to 3 or 4 distributors, and we're happy with that.
Yeah.
And they don't want to dilute the work of the existing distributors by adding more, because there's an issue here. If a distributor goes into a market and they specify the product all over town,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden the manufacturer puts in another distributor, that distributor gets a free ride on all of those specifications that were written.
Yeah. All the ongoing service of those.
Well, the ability to bid jobs and the ability to win,
Right.
and
Just for expansion
distributors,
upgrades. Yes.
distributors don't like that. So,
Yeah.
to answer your question, a system integrator who wants a line simply approaches the manufacturer. They decide if they want to add sales or add distribution. But some OEMs are actively looking to expand. And as you said, Joe, some distributors started with branches and then they turned them over to distributors, or vice versa. They started with
Yeah.
distributors and they bought them as branches.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
again, that's a corporate strategy that says we want the installation risk, and if they do, maybe they buy
Yeah.
distributors.
Yeah. It's interesting. Just a quick kind of addition. One of the things in the newsletter last a couple weeks ago when it was published, a lot of the big OEMs who are all publicly traded companies are talking a lot more about connected services or digital services. You could argue connected and digital in this case could be synonymous. I certainly have heard anecdotes of labor shortages, even amongst the big four, where we have a delay in getting you the service you need, even as a large university. Again, I've only heard this as anecdotes, but I think they're talking about this as a new growth opportunity, which I would agree. I'd be interested in your feedback, but I don't think it's 0 to 1 in that they never did service and they let all the integrators do the service, and now they're starting to do that service. I think maybe there's a renewed effort to grow that amount of work, just because, especially control systems, between upgrades, between expansions of buildings or expansions of just the systems, and then just maintenance that comes up, there is a nice, you can think of it almost as an annuity, right? We're a big OEM. We've installed in this large university. There will be a lot of work for you to continue to do over the coming years. But they're talking a lot about connected services, digital services, and I guess I'm trying to read between the lines and think, is this a nice trend that maps to AI, IoT, technology, augmenting labor, or is there really a lot of opportunity for the OEMs themselves to step up the amount of work they're doing on the services front?
Yeah, that's a good question. Service, in my view, is much more than fix it when it's broke.
Yeah.
Service is much more of a relationship with the end user where you help them along the way with all kinds of issues. They could want a sustainability solution. They could want a decarbonization solution. The end user may want to employ AI in their billing operations. So who
Right.
better than to go to your trusted provider, whether it be a system integrator or the company-owned branch of a big OEM. And I will say this: I've seen hundreds of these companies.
Yeah.
There's good ones on both sides.
Yeah.
There's good branches. There's good system integrators, very good system integrators, and there's horror stories. There's bad ones. This OEM branch location and wherever didn't do well, and there's a system integrator that didn't do well. So I think it's there's advantages to both sides. But to your point, Joe, because of the increasing complexity of systems, the
Yeah.
tying in of IT, OT, cyber,
Yeah.
it's a challenge for the smaller system integrator to have that expertise. Uh,
Yeah.
Take the typical system integrator has 30 or 40 employees. It's hard for them to have that expertise and
Yeah.
acquire it, retain it, keep those people. It's also hard for the OEMs. So
Yeah.
to your point, the challenge in the industry is skilled workers. Across
Yeah.
every company throughout the construction industry, not enough skilled workers and
Right.
hard to acquire them, hard to recruit them, hard to train them.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so you start to see developments in that area.
Right. And control systems are generally much more complicated than HVAC. HVAC is complicated, but when you look across the price, I think in the next couple of minutes, it would be great to talk more about Huron and some of the work you've done across kind of building these larger organizations. But my sense is there's more private equity backing for HVAC than controls because it's generally more straightforward, less complicated. And even though, labor for HVAC is not abundant, it's probably a little bit less complicated than buying up controls branches and distributors and integrators. Is that a fair?
Well, comparison between HVAC and building controls. Building controls, of course, are a subset of HVAC.
Yeah.
So in a commercial or institutional building, you put a bunch of equipment in: air handlers, terminal units,
Yeah.
boilers, chillers.
Yeah.
For the most part, that stuff comes pre-packaged. It's made at the factory. It's got
Mm-hmm.
all of the controls on it. It shows up on the job site. The
Yeah.
contractor connects pipes to it, connects
Yeah.
ductwork to it, connects electrical to it, and that's pretty straightforward. Control system, yes, I would agree that it's a little more complicated in
Yeah.
that you've got all of the controllers, you've got building automation software. On the upper end, you've got to decide what you're going to integrate to, whether
Yeah.
you're going to integrate, whether you're going to supervise fire points, or you're going to integrate to security, or
Yeah.
this kind of thing. On the field device end, you've got to select sensors, uh,
Yeah.
actuators, valves, all kinds of
Yeah.
different types, and they've got to be connected to all this various equipment, and it's all got to work together. So,
Yeah.
in some of these, you mentioned universities. Some of these universities have building automation systems that have tens of thousands of monitoring and control points.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's not trivial.
Yeah.
Whereas HVAC tends to be this air handler connected to these pipes and this ductwork, and
Yeah.
it's a standalone unit. Whereas a building automation system
Yeah.
could be 150 buildings on a campus. Huge
Right.
systems.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I went to a large university, 35,000 students live in a town. I mean, I think we're talking a couple million square feet, if not 10 to 15 million square feet of space for a given university of that scale, tens of thousands, which is, there's a couple hundred universities in America with, 25,000 and more students. I'm doing this by memory, but you then look at hospitals where I tend to think of a hospital of a million or more square feet might actually have 100,000 or more data points. So you're right. Just configuring all of that is a big effort, which I like talking through the numbers a little bit because I think viewers, it gives them a sense of the scale that we're really talking about here.
Yeah, a typical office building that's a 20 or 30-story office building has a rather modest building automation system. But some of the big university campuses, big corporate campuses that have big building automation systems and a separate building automation system in each of the big buildings, those systems are enormous. And they take a lot of support and a lot of care. And there's only certain technology that can do that.
Yeah.
There's some there's some OEM manufacturers, their system won't scale to that size, and
Yeah.
therefore it favors certain big boys.
Yeah. Um, oh, did you go ahead, Lewis?
Okay, go.
Oh, yeah, I was just going. One of the things I wanted to touch on that we were talking a little bit about this earlier. The systems integrator typically focuses. Maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but just to kind of put it in context, they're typically focused on a metro area. They're competing with others in the metro area. It seems unlikely, but sometimes common that a systems integrator might say, let's merge with the town next door, right? You could argue like Cleveland, Pittsburgh, not too far. Obviously, though, you're not calling, if you live in Cleveland, the Pittsburgh integrator to come over and do work. But it from what I have seen, and obviously you can add color or correct me if I'm wrong, is where private equity has stepped in is they've said, actually, there's a lot of dynamics that are similar from Cleveland to Pittsburgh, maybe Columbus, Ohio, Cincinnati, Ohio. I grew up in the Midwest in Indiana, so like these are all kind of like close towns. That you could say we want to roll those together, and there's a lot of efficiency. Is that the right way to think of it? Where a 50-person systems integrator branch, or integrator shop, they would focus on a city of one of the big couple hundred cities in America. The opportunity there is to scale by merging together or rolling up across others in the Southeast, Texas, West Coast, Midwest, something like that.
Well, the investment opportunity is twofold. One, by consolidating these independent system integrators, you can get the advantages of scale.
Mm-hmm.
So a single system integrator who has 40 or 50 people that's in a particular urban market, they're somewhat limited by their expertise. They can get some help from the OEMs and they can get some help from third parties, but they've got to, in many cases, they got to develop their own practices for estimating jobs, installing jobs, doing service. Whereas in a consolidation, what happens is you go find very good system integrators in different urban markets. You put them together, and then you have a best practice party. You say, who's got best practice for this, that, or the other? And you look at it and you say, oh, let's start doing this. Let's start doing that as a standard practice because we all agree it's the best way to do things. And so in a consolidation, and you're right, private equity has done consolidation of mechanical contractors,
right,
electrical contractors, but the attraction of this consolidation is you can educate and work with these system integrators to do more service. And again, not just fix it when it's broke, but actually do more customer service, energy audits, energy retrofits, HVAC upgrades.
Mm-hmm.
And if you do that correctly, you can drive the recurring revenue. This is non-competitive recurring revenue. You can drive that to where it's more than 50% of the total revenue of the business. So all of a sudden, you've got a whole different animal. You're in different cities, and you've got high recurring revenue, and you can now service regional customers. So if you regional and national customers, this simple system integrator can't do that. The single system integrator. And the resource issue goes like this. Maybe one business is really growing fast and they need a lot of people. Maybe a business in the next town over has some downtime for their employees. You can share people. You can share expertise. Maybe this system integrator has expertise with integrating different brands. Okay, that expertise can be passed to someone else. If you think about these consolidations, they're kind of the best of the both worlds. If you like a branch organization like some of the big OEMs have, these consolidations are a branch organization of resourceful system integrators.
Yeah.
and that's a very powerful thing. And
Yeah.
so it's going well, going well.
Yeah. And one other quick follow up, and then I think there's one or two kind of bigger picture questions to ask. But I was going to ask my sense. You noted kind of high level what makes a good systems integrator, and you're obviously looking. You said over 200 that you've seen under the covers. My sense is if you go to a city, I mean, I mentioned a couple cities in the upper Midwest, but it could be any city. If you talk to the buyers of integration services, so a university, a hospital, office park, they're going to have a sense of what is the better service provider and what is the less good service provider on some of those metrics. But that actually has an impact even up to the OEM, where there might be a sense of, oh, in this city, the reps that can serve one Big Four's product are better than the other Big Four's product, and that leads me to want to buy more of that Big Four's product for new buildings, upgrades, so on and so forth. And that's where the OEMs are interested, even down to this level of it's a 50-person integrator in this local city. They might say, look, we need to find a different partner, or we need to buttress our partner because we're losing jobs because the reputation of this partner is impacting our overall reputation as an OEM that's really at the end of the day making the product, not necessarily doing all the install. Is that kind of how you connect between we're a large $80 billion company. You mentioned Siemens, you used to work at Siemens, $80 billion company, obviously not all building technology. And here's a 50-person company that might have, millions in revenue, but there's an interest from top to bottom because of that dynamic.
Sure. You're absolutely right. The key factor here is how well do you serve the customer? How happy is the customer with your service? And some customers, they like the big corporate supplier because they think of them as stable,
Yeah.
global corporation, more likely
Yeah.
to be around next year. Other companies or other end users are quite happy to work with a local independent
Yeah.
because they know the owner. The
Yeah.
owner's taken care of them for a long time, and these could be big projects. These could be
Yeah.
big, and
Yeah.
therefore you're right. The OEM might say, "Gee, I wish we had a distributor like that."
Right.
So when we acquire in our consolidation, when we acquire independent system integrators, we like to find those people, and
Yeah.
part of the way you find them is who takes care of University of Colorado Boulder.
Yeah.
Who's the system integrator that takes care of that?
Right.
And you go into a market and you find out, oh, who takes care of the university medical center?
Yeah.
And you might find that it's a Johnson Controls branch. You might find it's a Siemens branch,
Yeah.
but you might also find it's an independent system integrator. And if that's the case, they're doing pretty well to have an
Yeah.
account of that size. And
Yeah.
so that's the connection between the customer satisfaction and the quality of the integrator.
Yeah.
Rick, just a quick question before we have to move on. As you've worked for an OEM before, how challenging is it dealing with competition? And what I mean by that is, for example, if you're in California, you may see two system integrators both repping Distech or ALC, for example. Like, how does the OEM manage those type of relationships to make sure that both integrators are happy within their current patch?
Yeah.
Well, if you are an OEM and you have independent distribution, and virtually all of them do, some
Right.
of the big OEMs have company-owned branches, but they virtually all have an independent channel as well.
Yeah.
And you may decide that in Northern California, you've got 3 or 4 distributors. The first rule is we want you to be exclusive to us for your building automation and your building automation software and controllers. System integrators typically don't. They always have a backup. They've got a representation with another organization. They're not supposed to, but they typically do. And so the concern is you don't want your business to slide that way. You don't want that integrator to start selling more of their backup product. So the challenge is, what's the issue? Is it a feature function issue? Is it a pricing issue? Is it customer prefers that product kind of a problem? So you've got to dig into that and find out. For example, you've got cases where the university used to be one brand, and then
Yeah.
all of a sudden they start using a different brand. How did that happen? Why did it happen?
Yeah.
And sometimes you can solve that, sometimes you can't.
Yeah. Yeah. One quick follow up. When you've talked a fair bit about the risk of working with, or the pros and cons, if you will, of working with the company owned branch and the independent integrator. I think the one thing, just to clarify, there is maybe more risk one way or the other, and you're going to look at, as the owner of the buildings, the risk. But at the end of the day, all of the products, the core, valves, actuators, gateways, field controllers, supervisory controllers being put in the building, those are still typically going to be by one of those big four or maybe big 10 to 20 companies. So it's not like you go to a local shop and like they have a factory and they're putting together circuit boards and building equipment that so there is risk one way or another, but they're all using hardware from one of maybe 20 companies. I think you touched on that earlier. I just wanted to clarify that, where if anyone's
Well,
watching this and trying to think, yeah, go ahead.
Joe, that's a great consideration. And one is, if you like a particular manufacturer,
Yeah.
for whatever reason, you think it programs easier or you've had good luck
Yeah.
with it, if the end user has that perception of the brand,
Yeah.
then another added benefit is if they can get it from multiple sources.
Yeah.
If there's a single authorized distributor in my town, okay, but I can get it from the guy across town and in a different town.
Yeah.
Versus if it's single sourced, that's a risk. If it's
Yes.
multiple sourced, then that's better. So those are considerations from a risk point of view. And some manufacturers have cover the waterfront kind of distribution. They've got 10 distributors in a market.
Yeah.
Others have 3.
Yeah.
And some, like some of the big OEMs, have both a branch and a distributor in the same market, same product. And some owners look at that and say, well, I like the product, I just want more easy ways to get it.
Yeah.
Not be locked into this particular. Nobody likes to get locked into any one supplier.
Right. No, that's great. I think one of this is maybe we can discuss this last question a little bit, but I'm also just looking at time, and maybe we'll in a couple months have you back, Rick, because this has been a very good conversation, and I think it's going to be illuminating to a lot of our listeners who maybe aren't nearly as deep in this indirect channel and how integrators work. But my point was, when we were just prepping for this over email and just planning what to talk about, you had noted there's a bit of from an investor point of view, Huron, for example, there's this view of, do I invest in advanced technology? And there's a lot of venture capital in particular flowing into advanced technology, right? Like, and it's not always situated as going to market as, you don't need people, use our tech. I mean, maybe 10 years from now that becomes a little bit more realistic, but there is technology that can help. And then the other side is a life cycle services company. I would just love for you to describe how you think about, as an investor, advanced technology, life cycle services, which could be technology enabled to some degree.
Right. So an investor, you have a choice. Do you invest in new bleeding edge technology, next best thing, or do you invest in an established service-based company that has 20 years of history of generating profitable business with existing customers? It's a choice. Venture capitalists often will invest in the early stage technologies. We happen to like service companies because you can look at the history, you can look at their customer relationships, you can look at the resources they have, and you can know that that's likely to continue. You're likely to be able to get through any recession,
Yeah.
construction cycle, a construction downturn like COVID. Um,
Yeah.
and we prefer that. One of the challenges with new technologies that we see is that you can get leapfrogged. So you
Yep.
could be
Hmm.
the BlackBerry of the industry, and that
Yeah.
is wonderful tool for a number of years, and then
Yeah.
guess what? Out of business
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
somebody came up with something better, and that's the problem. One of the problems with new technology. The other problem with new technology is what we talked about earlier. You have to find somebody to install and service it.
Right.
And if you're one of the big four and you've got new technology, that's not a problem because you've already
Right.
got established distribution. You put your label on it, everybody likes it.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're just a startup technology firm, it's really hard to build distribution.
Yeah.
It's hard to find good, reliable distributors. There's plenty out there, just hard to find them. And the and building your own branch organization is costly, takes time.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
we prefer the services business.
Yeah. It seems to map naturally to, emerging advanced technology better suited for a venture investor who's looking for high growth, willing to take on high risk. Whereas private equity, I tend to think of really investing in real businesses with real revenues, with real share and stability, and making them better, growing them, making them more efficient. And that's really where you would fit as a integrator, right? We have a real business here. We have real customers. We've been doing this for decades. Um, but
Not only,
there's yeah,
not only that, because they have an existing business with real customers, they can take new products and deliver them.
yeah,
So we can exploit the growth of new technology.
yeah,
We can become our consolidated business. We can become the distributor for new technology.
yeah,
But one of the problems with new technology is picture this: if somebody comes up to you and says, "Hey, I got a new business. I'm gonna come up with a new smartphone.
yeah,
Can you give me $100,000?" You think, well, wait a minute. There's a lot of smartphones out there. They're pretty smart people building those. They've
yeah,
come up with version 15 or version 16. How in the world are you going to compete with that? And
right.
that's a hard thing to
But some
do.
people try, don't they?
They do,
They
and
think they
some
can. When yeah.
and some are successful in different lines of business. But in building automation, whether it's fault diagnostics or a new backnet controller or some clever IoT thing, it's just as hard. That's
Yeah,
hard.
yeah, yeah. Makes
Nice.
sense. Yeah. Um, I mean, this has been great. I don't know, Rick, if there's anything else briefly you just wanted to touch on. I think we probably will find a time. I mean, now it's already late September, maybe early next year. We'll find a time for you to come back and just we can dig in more on some of these issues. We'll see what comments we get, what feedback we get from those who are watching now and watching. We have a YouTube channel now, and just go a little deeper. But anything quickly before that you also wanted to mention just on these topics we've discussed.
Uh, on the on the yes, on the technology or the I'm sorry, the shortage of skilled workers.
Yeah, good point.
That I do
Yes.
see
Is
it.
that the? I was going to come onto this, but I didn't know whether we'd have time. Would you say that's the biggest challenge for the industry, or top
Yes,
two or three?
yes,
Yeah.
yep.
Yeah.
During COVID, the
Go
big
ahead. Yeah,
challenge was supply chain. Couldn't get product.
yeah,
But since then, it's been can't get enough skilled workers. So what
yeah,
you're starting to see in the industry is you're starting to see apprenticeship programs. So companies actually, like the plumbers union or the electricians union, they're putting companies with non-union employees are putting together apprenticeship programs, which try to take people that are new to the industry, no experience whatsoever, bring them on board, teach them how to be an installer or a service technician. Now, of course, you can always get the product training from the manufacturer, but I'm talking about okay, now that you understand how this product works, how do you be a good installer or a good service technician? good project manager. You're starting to see a lot of apprenticeship programs from companies, from system integrators. Starting to see a lot of that. And you're seeing independent third party firms that will take people off the street, teach them the industry basics, and then offer them up to employers. That's a big trend.
Yep. And I was on the Nexus podcast discussing talent a couple of weeks ago. I think what we as an industry need to think about is that when we're no longer competing with each other for talent, but we're competing with different industries because there is a talent shortage in so many industries right now. They're all going through the same challenges, and we're all ultimately going to look at individuals, for example, with Stats and Jules, but there's other associations or initiatives, training people up off the streets who are completely green, getting them into the space. Like every industry is going to be going through that or going to be thinking about that. And we need to make more of a concerted effort on actually implementing more of those programs across the country rather than being siloed as just one or two across East Coast or West Coast.
Yep, I agree. I think what's happened in high schools is there was a shutdown of trade schools. There was an indication to students that you really have to go to college. You have to get a university degree. And in some cases, there was some negativity around people who chose to go into the trades. As a result, nobody goes into the trades anymore. And you're right, Lewis, it's a problem for car mechanics. It's a problem for plumbers. And we all need these trades to keep our homes and buildings operating. And we have to have a shift back to convincing people that that's an honorable thing to do, is a trade. And certainly we need workers. Now, artificial intelligence is helping a little bit in that there's certain things you can automate in a business, but you can't, we haven't figured out a way to automate how we're going to put a sensor on the wall or a valve in the building. That's
What, and just real quick to add to that, I know I'm checking time. I don't want to go too long, but you could also argue there is a human element to just delivering building services, in that if you're a large university, let's say, and you have a relationship with a local integrator that has a relationship with an OEM, if they came to you and said, hey, we no longer ever have to send somebody to your building, we'll monitor everything, we'll do everything digitally, I would argue that university might say, hold on, we got students here, we're learning, we're doing research. You could say in the research areas of a university, it's going to look a lot like a hospital, very much a validated environment. I don't know that they would react favorably to, great, never send a person ever to my building. They probably still would say, well, if you're not going to send people, I'm going to go find somebody else who will send people. And that's not necessarily to say send them all the time for everything or roll the truck to figure out what's wrong. You could, the nuanced point is, well, we can figure out what's wrong, and when we drive the truck to go fix it, we know what the problem is and we can fix it immediately. That's great. I think everyone will be supportive of that. But this idea that we're going to move away from people at all, I think it's like a lot of things in AI where there's the augmentation aspect versus replacing the people, though the jobs will inevitably change a little bit because of that.
Well, it's actually happening right now. One of the things that you can do when you consolidate all these businesses and you pool all of best practices, you can put in a capability that does exactly what you described. And that is, before you go to the building, before the truck goes, you analyze the building, you know what's broken, you know what part you need, you know whether the part's on the service truck or not. That all exists. And that's a help to the business owner, but somebody still has to get there and turn off the broken pipe, turn off the water.
Right.
So that there's certainly a lot of technology that helps with that, but you still need that technician in the truck.
Right. Yep. And, another, I mentioned earlier, I love numbers. It may be a number in closing. When I was at JCI, I was a product manager. I was working on cloud-based software, but there were peers of mine who I sat, across the aisle from, that were PMs for valves, actuators, the physical things in the building. And I think one or two of them, I just go out to coffee. I think some of them had hundreds of thousands of SKUs within their product portfolio, maybe even up to 1 million SKUs. So the idea that, one thing that those watching, you can't put one of 1 million valves, actuators, and other, related parts on a truck. It will not fit. So that's where, to add a little color to your point, Rick, like knowing what's broken before you go there is critical, because it's not like a house where, you could say the person you call for HVAC service, they might have one of everything they could potentially need, or if not, they can drive down the street to a supply house or Home Depot or something like that. I mean, we're talking about vast inventories of parts and SKUs.
Yeah, I'll tell you what's old school. Old school is the service technician, the customer calls and says, we don't have any heat or air conditioning on the 5th floor. Service truck rolls, service technician goes inside. They might be familiar with the building, they might not. They find the as-built, they go to the 5th floor, they look around, they say, oh, it's an ABC 123 valve.
Sure.
Oh, I don't have one. Drive back to the office. Oh, they don't have one either. That's old school. New school is when it's not cool, or when there's no cooling or no heating on a given floor, we can do a diagnostic that says what's broken, do we have it before the technician leaves. And if we don't have it, we can get it from a certain supplier by tomorrow. And can we solve the problem now? Maybe. Can we solve the problem tomorrow? Yeah, we'll have the parts tomorrow. That technology is all in place and gets used. And that's something maybe an individual system integrator on his own with 40 people can't implement.
Right.
Once you get 40 of those system integrators and you understand that capability, you can implement that company-wide.
Right. The technology investment would be higher ROI, but you also just have the capability to do it. Yeah, it makes sense. I think, maybe when we do this again in a couple months, we talk a little bit more about the role of how we were asking you advanced technology investing or service investing. Maybe we look at, well, how do we take the advanced technology and apply it to how you run integrators, and then even why it's not really feasible to do that with a 40-person branch, but it is feasible when you have 40-person branches. It's great. Yeah.
The independent system integrator is typically smart enough to figure out the technology, but to acquire it, train his people, buy the technology, buy the training, that's something that's typically not their strength.
Not a strength. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Nice. Well, Rick, I've loved this. I mean, it shows, because this is without a doubt our longest episode yet, and I'm sure everyone that's tuned in, or everyone that will tune in over the next few weeks, will really take a lot from this episode. So I appreciate your time and look forward. Maybe we do one just before AHR or just after AHR.
That'd be a good time. Yeah,
seems pretty timely. But that's all we've got time for. Thanks again for tuning in. Or if you see this over the next couple of weeks, let us know what you think, and if there's anything else that you'd want Joe or I to cover, or if you think there are any more great guests like Rick, please get in touch with Joe and myself. But we'll see you next week for another episode, theme TBC.
Thank you, Rick.
Thank you.